Welcome to the Twin Cities Business Show. We're here today with Jill Zullo from BioMADE. BioMADE is a really fascinating coalition of companies that's using organic products to replace synthetic materials and chemicals. She's going to talk a little bit about the state-of-the-art facility they're building out in Maple Grove and how do you turn science into money. Welcome to the Twin Cities Business Show. We are here today with Jill Zullo of BioMADE. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So we're going to dig into a little bit about what BioMADE is, which I think is a really exciting opportunity for Minnesota. You guys are building a big pilot plant out in Maple Grove. But first, I think we need to talk about fermentation. So can you please tell everyone how a cucumber becomes a pickle?
Wow, that is a great example of fermentation. There's a lot of others as well, like think cheese and beer, but I'll stick with the cucumber. So there are a lot of salt is used, but typically what you're doing is inviting a microorganism into the space to be able to utilize any free sugars and convert it into something else. So in the case of a pickle, it gets converted into an acid, which helps preserve the cucumber and makes it sour. That sourness really comes from the acid that is created by the organisms.
Very helpful. So tell me a little bit how BioMADE is using fermentation to do really, really big things.
Yes. So BioMADE, I'm going to back us up a little bit of what BioMADE is, and then
Please.
I'll jump into what we're doing on fermentation. So we were formed in 2020, and we're supported from the Department of Defense. And so there, the whole idea of sort of the request that came out was how do we make sure that the U.S. maintains its dominance in biotech? And how do we create some of the supply chains that are needed through the government domestically rather than having them offshore? So BioMADE responded to that. We formed a whole, I'm going to say, ecosystem where we have members that have joined. And what the members do is concentrate on the technology. So BioMADE funds it. And then now we are working on also how do we provide some of the infrastructure that's needed for our members to be successful. So our members typically are converting agricultural materials, think sugar from corn, sugar from sugar beets, or from wheat. And they then take that sugar via a fermentation and convert it into something else that is an interesting material that's needed. So some of the things that are traditionally produced via fermentation might be citric acid. That has been long in production since the 80s. Others are lactic acid. And in fact, here in Minnesota, we are the home of NatureWorks, which takes sugar from corn and converts it into lactic acid. And then it polymerizes that lactic acid into a degradable polymer or plastic. So there are a lot of very interesting things from everyday, sort of materials that we use or have to foods and people know of a lot of the medicines that are also, produced via fermentation. So we focus on materials, we focus on foods and sort of unique supply chains that biological systems can actually bring about. And our members are the ones that have all those technologies, and then we fund their research to develop or perfect those technologies.
Fascinating. So why would the Department of Defense care about turning agricultural products into bioindustrial chemicals?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I'll talk about the economic one first, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the supply chains that they might find interesting. So economically, think about what rural America. This is a big boost to the economy there, right? Because it is taking the crops that they grow, converting them into value-added products. It is building factories in said, rural America to be able to then not only extract the sugars from the agricultural product, but then convert those sugars into the end product. So those are good, high-quality jobs, and those would go for a higher price than just the grain themselves.
Mhm.
So there's an economic certain or output that's very interesting. There's one on national security, because if we are reliant, and we saw this back in 2020 and 2021, right, being reliant on many supply chains that are global versus local. So we want to be able to produce some of the things that we utilize from the US. So there's that. Then specifically, there are some very interesting products that can be produced via fermentation, and some that are surprising. So cement. You don't
Mm.
normally think that cement can be produced via fermentation, but there are precursors that do, and then you mix them together and they can harden and be a cement. So what that means is that the US could, as troops are deployed, let's say you need to get a lot of materials to them. They, in essence, can have fermenters that produce the products, mix it together, and you can create a landing strip that is made out of cement versus landing in a grass field. That will allow you in and out more easily. There's other products that people might want to eat, let's say high quality protein. You can ferment that right where your troops are, and then you can consume that. There are coatings that are used, one to protect, as an eyewear, to protect from laser. There are coatings that go on warfighters' clothes that also protect them from a wide variety of whether it's UV or other things as well. So there are certain products that the government is very interested in having their own dedicated supply chain.
So, can you explain how you turn corn into cement?
Sure. So, really, it's again extracting the corn, extracting the sugar from corn. You then put that sugar along with other nutrients that are needed in an organism. Sorry, in a fermenter, and that organism will then grow on the nutrients, metabolize the sugar, and produce an end product. Now it gets into all of the synthetic biology that we hear about. So, there's technologies today that can take all the enzymes that are needed to produce a given product and kind of put them into an organism so that you can have a full pathway that allows you to produce a unique product. Let me think of something. Maybe so instead of yeast that produce beer,
Hmm.
right? You can add several enzymes into the DNA of that yeast. And so that yeast then produces acrylic acid instead of alcohol or instead of any other product. So what you do is you direct the carbon away from what it normally would produce, aka alcohol if you're the yeast, and it redirects it to this pathway that has been inserted into the DNA of the organism, which allows it to produce whatever product is of interest.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of science.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because the US, for years and years, has been the predominant leader in synthetic biology. For years. I mean, it really started 80s, 90s, very high, I would say late 90s, 2000s, or beginning of 2000s.
Can you just tell people what is synthetic biology?
Okay, sorry. So synthetic biology is just a way of directly changing the DNA of an organism.
Okay.
So pulling something out, redirecting it, putting things in that you want to
Great.
be in. And when we think about the Bay Area of California,
Hmm.
there are a lot of startup companies that have started late 90s, 2000s, very well funded through venture capital, private equity, et cetera. So it's been going on for years and years. And the challenge that we have in the US is that some of that we couldn't convert into commercialized products because there were some gaps.
Hmm.
And so one of those gaps that does exist is infrastructure to be able to demonstrate it, scale it up and demonstrate. So I worked for Cargill for 30 years, and we did a lot of fermentations at a very large scale. And you would work on your organisms and improve its performance in the labs that we had. But when it came to doing something completely new, we either had to test it out in the large scale, which is very expensive and risky, or we had to find a pilot. So I did a number of research projects while at Cargill where I piloted throughout the world because there weren't the needed capabilities here in the US.
So, like, where would you have to go for something like that?
Right now, there's a really great facility in Europe, in the Netherlands. Very good, very high quality. I have piloted in France. I have piloted in Mexico. So there's a number of facilities in China and India. And one of the things that we're trying to do at BioMADE is build out those pilot plants. So you mentioned we're building a very large pilot plant. It'll be the largest of the 3 that we've announced so far here in Maple Grove, Minnesota. That one will have a 25,000 liter fermenter, which is enough to produce, if you were producing enzymes, let's say for application, that's sort of commercial scale. But if you're producing things like lactic acid, citric acid, that is still kind of too small of a system, which is why you can pilot within it. So you can kind of demonstrate, how does my organism perform when I get to this larger scale? And I can produce enough product that I can then work with my customers on the applications they may go into. So I can get my whole commercialization process sort of measured out, done. I'm going to say perfected, but nothing is ever. You learn a lot as you go, and that allows me then to come back, really build out my plan. If I'm Cargill, I go to the board and hopefully get some money. If I am, a startup company, I go to find some investors to say, hey, here's my old plan. Here's how I can get this out. Here's what I can do.
So previously, I mean, even at a company like Cargill, one of the biggest companies in the world, you would have to pilot your stuff overseas in the Netherlands, France, and Mexico. Now you'll be able to pilot in Maple Grove.
Yep.
What kind of opportunity is that for Minnesota?
Oh, I think it's huge because there's a couple of things. With the university, we have a number of different startup companies that start there. There's also a fermentation institute that is a little bit smaller. So sometimes companies go and they do some small tests or small trials
At the university.
at the university. When you're successful there, head on over to Maple Grove. Right? We can partner with the likes of Cargill on some of their projects, and they can scale up. Now, hopefully they build maybe in Minnesota or someplace close. We have some members that have scaled up their facility, other places in the world, but then they came and they built their factory in Marshall, Minnesota. So Marshall, Minnesota, Solugen.
Solugen.
And Marshall, Minnesota is an ADM facility, so they process corn there, and then the dextrose or the sugar they get right off their corn could go, through a pipe to a new factory that is built right there, and then make it really easy to have your commercialization scale facility right here in Minnesota.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to really start at the lab level, test, pilot, and then work towards commercialization and kind of coming up with people you can sell the product to all right here in Minnesota.
Yes.
Really interesting.
And we have people we have companies right here that are very interested in the end products, whether it's food. Again, a lot of medicine comes through there that it's not our focus. Our focus is a little bit more industrial and food related, but between different applications, different material type applications and foods, you have offtake partners right here in Minnesota as well.
So we've been talking a little bit about Minnesota as this living lab concept, and you guys, and there are a few other initiatives bubbling up all at the same time where people are going to be able to test and pilot these really, really big ideas. One of the things we've really been focused on is how do we get those companies to locate here in Minnesota? What do you think it would take?
Well, I think Minnesota has done a tremendous amount to help us even build. So there was the Minnesota Forward Fund that was formed, and Betty McCollum was key in getting that done, and that really helped match. So our pilot facility, a little bit over 200 million, 150 million coming from the Department of Defense, and 50 million coming here from the state of Minnesota. So those sorts of things really help. Right? Because then there is the infrastructure, you can start to see the ecosystem, you can start to build it. That's super helpful. Certainly permitting is something that is also helpful. Permits here in Minnesota take quite a long time. And so I think we have to figure out, how do we move at the speed of business? We want to do the right things for the environment. We want to do the right things for, whether it's air, water, et cetera. Absolutely. And we want to move at the pace of business. So, what needs to be true to make that happen, I think is really great. Really thinking, how do we partner? One of our principles is, and it kind of came through, we were experiencing a number of cost escalations as we went through the whole process. And we're like, wow, okay, we can't put in all the equipment than we originally had thought. How do we still offer that same experience? Well, we can find others in the Minnesota ecosystem that have some parts of the process or the equipment. So we're partnering now with a company that offers drying capabilities. So we're not going to put in the drying capabilities, and we will ship our material to them, and they will finish that process. So I'm trying to use taxpayer dollars to put only novel, new, unique pieces of equipment and systems into this ecosystem, and then partner for the rest.
Pair it up with stuff that already exists.
Exactly. So how do we partner more with the University of Minnesota? How do we partner, a number of different ways? We had a meeting with the Minnesota Business Alliance, maybe it was about a year ago. And we had this topic of like, hey, where can we find capabilities, or do we understand each other's capabilities really clearly? Because if we do, how do we tie the knots and tie the strings between those partnerships rather than build the capability ourselves? There's not enough money to go around as it is. How do we really leverage our dollars a little bit more efficiently?
That seems really smart to me.
It does. It's just not, we get in our own way sometimes. So we have to be planful about it.
Yeah. So thinking about how this process works, when I was at your conference and there was a giant tire made out of dandelions.
Rubber
Yes.
from dandelions.
Rubber
so it's
from
not
dandelions.
like there was
the
yellow.
It looked like it looked like a big tire.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And somebody said that's made out of dandelions, and I said I don't believe you.
Yeah.
But it really looked like a huge tire. So
Yes.
take me through that process. Say that was a brand new initiative. How do you take somebody who has dandelions and turn them into a tire that's available for commercial opportunities?
Yeah. First of all, it's not the dandelions that, like we blow and they go everywhere. It's not our, front yard dandelions.
Okay.
So this is...
I was going to say, I have
because I also said, I have a whole bunch that I can contribute. These are dandelions that grow really deep, thick roots. Think of tapioca roots, or like a big carrot, or, potato, like a really big tuber on the bottom. They have a latex that you can extract. Now that maybe... I don't know if most of the rubber actually comes from rubber trees, but it's the same deal. It's like from the sap of a rubber tree is this, sort of material that you can come out, and then you can there's some, additional chemical conversions, but that gets turned into into rubber. So you start with a latex sap that gets extracted and then goes to rubber. So there's a number of different challenges you have. One is we've demonstrated that it can be true, and there was a big, huge tire. That tire would go on an airline, right, on a plane, right. So that was a landing tire.
It was huge.
Yes, and again, the part of the interest of this is that because we do not have all the natural rubber supply chains within the domestically, could we start thinking of what percentage of our rubber? Maybe it's not all, but what percentage of our rubber we would want produced domestically. So you now have to convert that dandelion into a row crop. So what's like it? Is it's kind of like a carrot. So how do you extract a carrot? So you just have to kind of go through how do you scale up even the growing of a new crop in a way that it's efficient and effective, right? Corn, wheat, all of those have been grown for hundreds of years. There have been really a lot has done to really improve the yield per acre, all of that to get it super economic. When you start out with this, it won't be economic out of the gate. But there are things that are like it that, all right, so if they learned that in this industry, how do we convert it to the dandelion growth industry? And then you would start growing and harvesting, extracting the latex, and then off you go into your normal rubber processing.
Fascinating. So then that's sap you don't have to take out of the rubber trees. It's whatever product you have to put on a boat to bring it over, to put in the factory, you're avoiding all of that by being able to do that domestically.
Yes.
And I see where the national security imperative comes in, because if all of our rubber is coming from a place where it has to get on a boat, and there is, let's say, a conflict in the middle of the ocean,
Yes.
that's a problem.
Yes. And also subject to monsoon seasons and all the rest of that. So this is, a little bit, it's the domestic, but it's also it potentially could be more protected and consistent, if you will.
Yeah. So how did Minnesota end up with this facility coming here specifically?
And I'm going to give the credit to Betty McCollum, right? And then our CEO, Doug Friedman, they partnered as BioMADE was created. And while I've been at BioMADE now for about 2 years, so I was still at Cargill. And it was super interesting because when the Department of Defense, started with this, the idea of throwing out, this proposal or call for proposal, they stopped at a number of different spots, and they did stop at Cargill, and they had, okay, what would help you? What would be true? What would make us go faster? And so the Department of Defense did a good job of soliciting a lot of ideas and input, put out a call for proposal, and there were sort of two groups that were sort of, kind of vying for it. And the BioMADE group was very collaborative from the beginning. So Cargill kind of participated in that group, and there were several, as we put the proposal in, there were several, day-long meetings, very collaborative, building, making sure all the elements that would allow you for commercialization of products were included in the proposal. So very quickly, again, University of Minnesota was at the table, and so Minnesota just kind of became something. And with Betty McCollum's spot on the appropriations committee, Doug had conversations with her and her staff. And a really big reason is the Minnesota Forward Fund that was formed, which really helped us.
That's great. One of the things that you're doing as part of this role is you're building a large industrial facility from scratch, from the ground up. Um, can you get a little bit into why that's difficult to do here? How the costs make it somewhat commercially unaffordable? I think
Yeah.
about this and I'm like, why wouldn't Cargill have just built its own facility here? Can you talk a little bit about what that process has been like, and if any parts of that have surprised you?
Yeah, and maybe I'll even angle it just from if a Cargill or an ADM or any commercial company,
Hmm.
they're going to build a pilot that like kind of fits most of their processes, right?
Yeah.
And what the challenge that happens is that it's not always used. So Cargill does have pilot facilities here, there, and
Yeah.
everywhere, but there's not like this really one large pilot they bring every single fermentation
Hmm.
to. Because just think about the capital. While you're always working on improvements, there's certain things that you can kind of do within the system, and you know how it's going to react. If you use your same organism, you know how it's going to react from this small little lab fermenter out into the large fermenter because you've
Right.
done it years and years. So again, they do a lot of piloting that way. But to think about brand new things, which is what my role more at Cargill was, the brand new thing, we didn't have the pilot. We would have had to, cobble it all together. And they say, okay, so after you pilot it for 6 months, well, what's going to happen to it? Well, I don't know. Maybe somebody else will use it. Well, maybe not, right? So Cargill is very efficient and effective with their capital, and they want to make sure they're putting capital to something that is generating income on a regular basis. And so that's the challenge for sort of one company building the pilot for what it needs. You're going to direct it very specific for what you need at that moment.
Hmm.
And then when you try something new, it'll change and be different. So part of our challenge is how do we build a process that works for all,
Yeah.
right? So fermentations can be very aerobic, meaning you're pumping a lot of oxygen and you have an agitator so that, they're really active and really aerobic, or they can be anaerobic, needing no oxygen. And so you have to design a fermentation or a fermenter that can do all of that. So
Hmm.
that means really good mixing. That means oxygen, might mean sparging, nitrogen, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of different technologies that need to go into that fermenter. That means it can be expensive,
Yeah, I bet.
right? And then if we're trying to think of, okay, what are, most of the things you produce your product, you got to remove the cell. So, okay, so we can use a wide variety of techniques to remove the cell, but we've kind of taken some filtration ones that are pretty well accepted for most, right? And then there's a way of centrifuging out any particulates. So let's have a centrifuge. And then one of the big challenges is these fermentations are done fairly dilute. So you typically want to like evaporate. So meaning removing water, so that you are concentrating, your final liquid product, and then you can pull any impurities out. So but the impurities that one fermentation has versus another is completely different.
So it's enormously complicated.
Yes, thank you. I probably should have started there.
No, we got there, right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting thinking about how you now have to wrap your head around how so many of these different types of things are going to be made, and you probably have to do a little bit of predicting about where we're going in the future without really having a pathway to knowing what new big ideas are going to exist. How do you do that?
Well, we partnered with our members to say, hey, what's coming down the pike? The good thing is that there are only certain number of organisms. So there's yeast, there's bacteria, there's algae, there's fungi, et cetera. So we kind of know some of those. Cargill, BioMADE also hired people that have been doing this for a while. So when we think about all the people that have gotten pulled in, I have pulled in quite a few Cargill people. There's over 200 years of experience sitting at the table as we're trying to make choices. And we bring our members in and say, okay, so what do you think is more important here? Unfortunately, talking about how these are expensive, costs have escalated. Steel prices in the last, roughly 10 years have risen by 45% in the U.S. U.S. steel, 45% higher. It is leveling off, and it looks like it'll decrease. It's projected to decrease 10% or so over the next couple years. But unfortunately, it's still at a significant premium to world steel.
Yeah.
So between that, U.S. labor rates are higher than either China or India. So our U.S. costs are higher. We think it's the right thing to do to build and use as many domestic materials as we can. So we do that. But what it means is we just won't have as much equipment on this first go around. So we're trying to get all the fundamentals, and then we're trying to partner with as many as we can to provide the rest of the experience for our customers. We will ask for additional funds, both at the state level and at the federal level, to add more and more, downstream. We call them, each piece of equipment is a unit operation. So more and more units that we can, kind of bring into the facility over time.
Interesting. What are some of the stickiest chemical or material challenges that we don't have a solution to now, but if you could snap your fingers and invent one, you would happily do?
A passion of mine is probably packaging. Packaging, right? So when you think about how great a plastic water bottle, right? It's portable, it's light, it's easy to transport, et cetera. That's great. Unfortunately, that comes from petrol-derived materials, and we know of all the microplastics that are now found everywhere.
So it's just basically made up of oil and microplastics.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And so how is it that we could get some that degrade? I mentioned previous, the PLA that comes from NatureWorks. There's a lot of other new interesting either monomers or polymers that are being created from biotech. So can we find that new thing? Yes, we can also all walk around with our reusable water bottles, which is a really great way. But plastics still, they're very lightweight, and they're still friendly for a lot of different packaging applications. So I do think the more and more we think about how do we change packaging, that is a very sticky one. And part of this, I'll say the stickiness is also cost. A bottle of water, if you need it to be portable and whatever, you're someplace, it can't cost $10, right? So we've got to get through demonstration and into larger scale for some of these things to really start to pan out economically.
So that's the moment at which we could start to see this potentially bring down or get equal on costs, is just huge scale.
Huge scale and efficient process, right? There's two things. And there's a lot of research that our members are doing and universities do to impact the economics of fermentation process. So one of the bigger challenges is an organism is a living thing. And so typically its end product is sort of its waste, if you will. It gets energy typically as it derives the product. So that's the reason that it's producing it. Energetically favorable, and then it's the end of its metabolism. Well, what typically happens is they kind of die in a certain level of concentration of their end product. So in order for us to really reduce not only the capital, but also reduce the water use, we would call intensify the process. So how do we get a higher concentration of the end product in that fermenter, and the organism is still living? There's a lot of engineering tricks that are being explored. Can you extract some or partial, fully extraction? Can you do a full continuous? There's a lot of different, again, tools and techniques that are being explored, but they're not perfected yet today. So we've got to have higher productivity, and we've got to have a higher concentration of the end product in the fermentation to really get an economic end product.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I mean, as much as it's ever going to me, it does. Yeah, yeah. No, and I think it's just fascinating to sort of think about, where this is all headed, right? So maybe take us 10 years down the road. You guys are successful. You figured a couple things out. What does that look like? Like, what does BioMADE produce, and how has it changed the world?
Yeah. I'm going to go a couple of different ways on that. First, BioMADE ourselves, we will be piloting other companies' technology. So from what does BioMADE produce? Probably kind of nothing. We produce a lot of, end products and research products for our customers. But hopefully some of those have now gone on and built a facility in Marshall, Minnesota, and maybe another one in Iowa, and who knows, right? So those are starting to expand and grow. Another one that we've been thinking a lot about is, as we start to produce certain products, some of which are very interesting to the government. Let's say it's a coating, right? And it's a flame retardant coating that the government's really interested in. Their application quantity is usually pretty small. But the exciting thing is, maybe we could produce that in Minnesota at the Maple Grove facility. And that allows then the government to get what they need. The company that it's their technology now has an ongoing offtake. So they're getting revenue coming in from that. It might not, because the volume isn't huge, it might not be all perfected. But what allows them to do is go out and get investors, because they now have a commercial arrangement.
Yeah.
So that same coating could also go on our children's pajamas and protect our children from the flame, right? And it's a biological PFAS-3 coating. So there's some things that I would hope could happen, that the government, in essence, takes what they need, but that gives a kind of boost to the rest of the commercialization story. And then one more thing I'll add is, we're starting to think about, how do you get more the actual commercial facilities here? And I talked to you about how the steel is higher and labor is higher and all the rest of that here. Well, that's obviously true on a commercial level as well. And so one of the things that we can be afraid of is, if our pilots are very successful, means that we have de-risked a number of biological technologies. We do not want them to go to China or India and get built commercially there. We've done all the de-risking. So how do we figure out what's the right ecosystem? How can the government help? Interesting enough, we just published a study yesterday where we had polled the U.S. Consumers. And we found that 60% of U.S. consumers say that they want to remain competitive with India and China for biological products, which is really interesting. And then 56% of the American public wants and thinks that we need to have more products coming from biology. So that's really, really interesting. And now the kicker, the third point that I'm very excited about, another 60% of the American public, since the government should invest in those technologies to help make them true. And even more important is that only 5% disagreed. It feels like the American public, there's a lot of disagreement, right? But
Yeah.
only 5% disagreed that that should not be true.
You can get 5% of people to. There's nothing that only has 5% of people that disagree.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're really excited about this and saying, hey, these are things that not only the, I would say the biotech or biomanufacturing, ecosystem wants, but the public at large really wants this as well.
So, I mean, an interesting piece of that, I think, is we've seen with all of the large scale industrial things that we try to do in the U.S. There is this strain of kind of NIMBYism that runs through the public. They don't want. I don't want a data center there. I don't want housing there. I don't want anything there. And the end result has been that for a long time there are just a bunch of things that we have not built. Do you think that this offers sort of a pathway through that by virtue of being more popular than some of the other stuff that might be on the table?
I do. And I think where the commercial manufacturing are in rural areas, right?
Yeah.
So it's best to almost be co-located with one of the big carbohydrate producers.
Like the
right?
Marshall example.
Like the Marshall example, exactly, because you can co-locate right there, and now you don't have to ship your dextrose. It's in a pipe that goes straight there.
Yeah.
You can share on water and share on security and share on wastewater treatment, et cetera. So it's really building a full ecosystem. In fact, in Cargill, that was one of the businesses I ran, and we have a facility like that in Eddyville, Iowa, and Blair, Nebraska. But the Minnesota one here is an ADM one, and it really helps other companies build off of the infrastructure that's already there.
Interesting. So co-locating with other companies is an advantage for you guys and for them.
Yes. And again, in rural US, there typically is less NIMBY, I would say. And when you have a larger, now you can attract, a city can build in its size, so you can attract a little bit more amenities, and we partner with the universities to make sure that there is an education workforce that is developed to really help this kind of growth within the U.S.
That's great. I'd love to dig into your background a little bit. So what did you study in your academic career?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad here at the University of Minnesota, graduated with a biology degree, and then I went to Iowa State and got my PhD in food technology and really a specialization more in microbial fermentation. And I started in Eddyville, Iowa, straight out of grad school for Cargill, and then spent about 2-3 years in Eddyville, Iowa, working on citric acid fermentation, ediconic fermentations. Came up here, worked for NatureWorks. It's still part of Cargill. It's a joint venture of Cargill, and worked there. Kind of came back to Cargill, kind of jumped over into management, and then eventually moved over into the business side to really help grow the businesses that were enabled by biotechnology. So whether that was Cargill's done some alternative sweeteners, so non-caloric sweeteners that come from fermentation, as well as then materials that come from fermentation.
Wow. So when you were, 17, 18, deciding where to go to college, did you already love biology? And did you ever imagine that it could take you to where it has?
My journey wasn't quite that straight.
Yeah.
I knew I liked science, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with science. So came here in Minnesota. I think I was pre-med for 6 months, you kind of dabble on various things. My biggest thing was I don't know that I always want to be in a lab. So what do you do if you don't always want to be in a lab, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of struggled with that. Took a year, actually had a great job. I was a tour guide for Miller Brewing in Milwaukee for a year, which was a blast. And then found my way to grad school, and I kind of fell in love with learning again in grad school. And I also realized, you don't always have to be in the lab. You have to be a really good critical thinker. You have to understand scientific principles, but there's a lot that you can do with that. So came into Cargill, kind of bench scientist, but quickly moved to project management and then people management.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was that Miller experience sort of your first big blush with fermentation?
Uh, well, I consumed quite a bit of it first,
Yeah.
but yes, it was. And so you'd give a tour with these really large fermenters and the whole works. Yeah.
Is there anything that would surprise people about Miller beer that we may not know that you as an expert would?
Huh. I think the biggest thing, and Miller Lite, all that, they get the feedback of like it's not as tasty. But think about consistency. So a can of Miller Lite or a Miller High Life, bottle of Miller High Life has to taste the same throughout the U.S., even though it's brewed many other places, and that's a big challenge.
That's interesting. I've tested that thesis and it's largely
Yes.
correct in my experience. Really interesting. So, are there pieces of that and that consistency that you take through to your work today?
100%. 100%, right? Because you have to be able to. I mean, that's one of the things sometimes when we're choosing what to fund,
Mm-hmm.
we kind of look at and say, wow, this is super cool. This would be great. But can you scale it? Can you do it consistently? Can you do it repetitively? Or does it have like a bunch of bells and whistles? The biggest thing I learned in the first job I had at Cargill is that you would scale up a new technology and you would have to go out. You're in an R&D lab, right? So you can babysit this thing, right? It's going to go out into this huge fermenter, and these operators at 3 a.m. something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It can't need babying, right?
Yeah.
So how do you get things to something that's easy and reproducible right off the bat as quickly as you can? And having that sort of eye on how do you convert science into money is what I think, that's what I really fell in love with at Cargill. And starting in a plant was the greatest place for me to do that because you could see like, oh, I made it too fancy. This it didn't work. This was a real big challenge. No way it's gonna cost millions of dollars to engineer a system to do that. Nope, that's not gonna work. Let's go back to the drawing board. And so that really helped me, I think, throughout my career. And even one of the reasons I said I kind of want to go to BioMADE, like kind of take a different step in my career. And this phase of my career is all about impact. So how do I impact really the biomanufacturing ecosystem throughout the US? How do I impact, the people that are selecting, the projects that we fund, and really having that eye on, well, it's going to eventually, be with two operators at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
So let's make sure that we're doing things that are easy and consistent.
Really cool. How do you think we build a workforce for all of these new, wild, and interesting projects that maybe are nascent or even don't exist yet?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time and effort on that, and we partner with a wide variety of universities, right? So universities have a ton of new tools in AI on how to teach people effectively and give them the real, the virtual reality and give them the real experience. That is a tool that's definitely been used. We've done some really interesting things on warfighter to scientist program, where
Okay.
there you take warfighters that have come back from being deployed. We know that they're extremely hardworking. We know that they're dedicated. We know that they're good at thinking on their feet. But they've come back and they don't know what's next. Well, let's take you into the science field and explain how cool that can be when you're thinking on your feet and you need to be agile and all those things can happen. And we have I'm trying to think if we've done 4 or 5 different sessions like that, and they have been very well received. And so kind of rolled that program sort of formally out to a number of different universities. So I think there's a number of tools in our toolbox today that are different and will continue to evolve with the science.
Fascinating. When you're say 20 years down the road, you're looking back, what will make you feel like what you've done was a success?
Mhm. Seeing some commercial products, really seeing materials today that are incorporated in our ever. There's a number of different materials, whether it's spandex or a number of different weaves that can be included. Silk can come from biology versus spiders or synthetic. And having those, like I can go to the store and I can purchase materials that have been made in a fermenter or the precursor that has been made in a fermenter. I'm going to love that. And you can do that to some extent today, but between that and packaging, that is really going to make my heart happy. I'm
That's
going to
great.
see the proliferation of the jobs. We're going to see better in rural America, and we're going to see a less reliance on the global, as well as lower carbon emissions, because it doesn't come from petro, but it comes from an annually renewable material that actually sequesters CO2 out of the air.
Turning science into money.
There you go. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. This was a blast.
Really appreciate it. Thank you as well to Keely Doyle, Gabe Noah, Mike Novak, Ali Alt, and Connor O'Neill for all your work behind the scenes. We will see you next time.